Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be talking about one of the greatest, most celebrated, decorated and iconic vibraphonists of all time, the one and only, the legendary Gary Burton. And since bursting onto the scene in the 1960s, Gary Burton has seen it all, done it all, and played with them all, and is considered by many to be one of the most important voices of the vibraphone instrument, and is regarded as one of the most respected band leaders in jazz music history. And he has collaborated and played with a number of great musicians and bands over the years, from Hank Garland to Floyd Cramar to Chet Atkinds to Carla Bley, Chick Corea, Makoto Ozone, Stan Getz, Eddie Daniels, Stephen Grappelli, Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett, Steve Lacy, Tommy Smith, and Eberhard Weber. And he has also collaborated with many of the all-time great guitarists, such as Larry Coryell, Jerry Hahn, David Pritchard, Mick Goodrick, John Scofield, Wolfgang Muthspiel, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Ralph Towner, Julian Lage, and of course, the one and only, the legendary Pat Metheny. And Gary Burton has released a lot of albums as a band leader under his name. And today, for this edition, I am going to be taking a look at Gary Burton's GRP catalogue of albums, which is a total of 4 studio albums. And I am aware that Gary Burton has released 2 collaborative efforts with Makoto Ozone and Rebecca Paris. But for the purposes of this edition, I am purely going to be taking a look at Gary Burton's 4 solo albums. So I am going to be talking about each recording individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. So I'm going to start with the first album, which was released in 1988. And this album doesn't really get talked about that much when it comes to Gary Burton's GRP catalogue of albums, but it's a very good one. And this was released in 1988, and this is Times Like These. So Times Like These is a very underrated album, very hard to find, but I highly recommend it's worth checking out, especially the CD edition of this album, which has 1 bonus track. And this features a quartet outing with John Scofield on guitar, Mark Johnson on bass, and Peter Erskine on drums. And Michael Brecker is featured on 2 tracks as well. Excellent recording, very underrated, doesn't get talked about that much, very hard to find, but if you can find it, like I said, it's definitely worth a listen, and one that I occasionally go back to listening to quite a lot. And this album is very commercial for Gary Burton, especially if you've heard a lot of his early works from the 60s to the 70s, and this doesn't make it a bad thing. It's just Gary Burton's going in a different direction with his music, but it's still very enjoyable and definitely worth listening to. So we're just going to have a quick look. A very iconic picture of the master in action. So we've got Times Like These, the title track by Makoto Ozone, Or Else by Vince Mendoza, Robert Frost by Jay Leonhardt, Why'd You Do It by John Scofield, PM by Chick Corea, Was It So Long Ago by Gary Burton, Bento Box by Makoto Ozone, and another composition by John Scofield, Do Tell. So there are the compositions there. And that's the best of the best right there, I say. Look at that. Real men have beards. So we got some sleeve notes here. And who's credited on what instruments. Michael Brecker's sax playing matches up very well with Gary Burton's vibraphones, and it gives the music more of a steps ahead sort of feel. So anyone who's listened to Michael Brecker will remember that he was a member of Steps Ahead with vibraphonist Mike Neary, and it's got a very similar sort of sound on those 2 tracks, and for me they're the 2 best tracks of the entire album, and they're definitely worth a listen because Michael Brecker, he sounds fantastic as always in any situation. John Scofield, great guitar playing as always. The rhythm section of Mark Johnson and Peter Erskine, they're just outstanding as always, and they've collaborated together on a number of projects with other musicians over the years. And Mark Johnson, great solid bass player, lots of great bass work. Peter Erskine, I would say, is one of the most reliable and great drummers to have in a band. He can make anyone sound good, and he's just an excellent drummer and one of the absolute best ever. And this is a real true supergroup of all-time great musicians, and highly recommend you check this out just for the two Michael Brecker tracks alone. But title tracks for me, top tracks for me, I would say is Times Like These, Was It So Long Ago, Robert Frost, Why'd You Do It, and PM. But great album and great collection of songs. And as I said, it's not really an album that gets talked about that much when it comes to Gary Burton's GRP catalogue, but one still worth checking out. So there you have it, Times Like These. So as we move along to the next album, which was released in 1990, and before I mention what the next album is, anyone who knows what's coming next, I would say this next album is probably Gary Burton's best album of his entire GRP catalogue because of one certain gentleman that plays on this album. You know who he is. I'll mention it in a minute. But a lot of people kind of turn their nose up at the GRP catalogue of Gary Burton's career, and I don't see why, because the next album I'm going to be talking about, would you honestly turn your nose up at this? Because I wouldn't. And the next album that was released in 1990 was Gary Burton Reunion. So this needs no introduction whatsoever. As we all know, Pat Metheny first started his career in Gary Burton's band back in the 70s. He was in his band for 3 years, and obviously this is the first time that Pat Metheny and Gary Burton have played together since 1977. So that's a long time. Pat Metheny left Gary Burton's band to start his own band up, which would go on to become one of the greatest and most iconic ensembles of all time, the Pat Metheny Group. And these guys got back together in '89 and recorded this outstanding album with a great band featuring Mitchell Foreman on keyboards, Will Lee on bass, once again Peter Erskine on drums, Pat Metheny on guitars, and Gary Burton on vibraphone and marimba. A true reunion. They haven't missed a beat. They sound as good, if not better, than the last time they played together. And, you know, all due respect to Gary Burton, but I would probably say this is more Pat Metheny's show because a lot of the music sounds like PMG just with an additional vibraphone added to the mix, but that doesn't make it a bad thing. This is still a great album, one that I love listening to a lot, and it's very heavily PMG orchestrated, and it's fantastic. So let's have a look. We look so adorable, don't we? And I love the album cover as well. It's just very weird, but at the same time, very, very cool. So we've got Autumn by Polo Orti, the title track, which was composed by Mitchell Foreman, Origin by Mitchell Foreman, Will You Say You Will by Vince Mendoza, a Pat Metheny composition, House on the Hill, Panama by Paul Mayers, Chairs and Children by Vince Mendoza, Wasn't Always Easy, The Chief by Pat Metheny again, Time Post Fleece, which is Happy Times by Polo Orti, and another Polo Orti composition, which is a bonus track, Quick and Running. So there we are, there's the track listing. Some sleeve notes about how the projects came together. Some more sleeve notes about their history. And yeah, some more. Excellent album. The best album of the GRP catalogue, as far as I'm concerned. Pat Metheny and Gary Burton Reunion. It's very much Gary Burton's album, but I would say it's both their albums. You know, Pat Metheny's got top billing, and deservedly so. Standout tracks for me. What can I say, really? I would probably say Origin, Will You Say You Will, Chairs and Children, Wasn't Always Easy, and The Chief, and Quick and Running, but no bad composition in sight. Every song is top notch from start to finish. And I would say, in my opinion, the best Gary Burton album of his GRP catalogue. And a lot of that is due to Pat Metheny, but still a great album. Pat Metheny and no Pat Metheny, excellent. So we come to the next album. This was released in 1991 and one that I like listening to a lot. Cool Nights. So a real supergroup here. So we got Peter Erskine back on drums, Will Lee on bass, Bob Berg on saxophone, Bob James from Foreplay on this album, and Wolfgang Muthspiel on guitar. Great, great album. One that I listen to quite a lot. This is probably my favourite of the GRP catalogue. So we've got Going Home, Cool Nights, With Mallets a Forethought, Take Another Look, I Never Left, Gorgeous, Hubba Hubba, Hopscotch, Artifacts, The Last to Know, and Farmer's Trust. Brilliant album. This was quite a reasonably big album. Not one that gets talked about that much. So, Going Home, composed by Mitchell Foreman, Cool Nights by Pat Metheny, With Mallets a Forethought by Bob James, Take Another Look by Pat Metheny, I Never Left by Tommy Camp, another Mitchell Foreman composition, Gorgeous, Hubba Hubba by Vince Mendoza, Hopscotch by Wolfgang Muthspiel, Artifacts by Bob James, and two Pat Metheny compositions, The Last to Know and Farmer's Trust from Pat Metheny Group's Travels live recording. So even though Pat Metheny isn't on this album physically, there are about 4 of his compositions that are featured on here. And he plays a big part, even though he doesn't physically play on this. And it's a real super group once again. And, you know, one thing I like about Gary Burton is he always surrounds himself with top-notch musicians. So let's have a look. We got the sleeve notes. Some more sleeve notes. And yeah, a great album. Standout tracks for me, I would say, are Cool Nights, With a Mallets a Forethought, Take Another Look, The Last to Know, and Farmer's Trust. But great album nonetheless. One that I like listening to a lot, and one that I always go back to the most. So we move to the next album, which was released in 1992, and this is Six Pack. Now, Six Pack is a very different project to Gary Burton's previous GRP recordings, and this features a lot of star guitar power. So we've got Kevin Eubanks, Jim Hall, B.B. King, Kurt Rosenwinkel, John Scofield, and Ralph Towner. Some super names on here. So nice. So that's a very weird cover. So we've got Anthem, composed by Mitchell Foreman, Six Pack, the title track by Gary Burton, Summertime by George Gershwin, Jack's Theme by Dave Grusin, Lost Numbers by Mitch Foreman again, Double Guatemala by Pat Metheny, Ashpodo by Dave Clark, Redial by Ralph Towner, Invitation by Bronslaw Casper, My Funny Valentine by Richard Rogers, Something Special by Jim Hall, and Guitarra Picante by Ralph Towner. There's John Scofield, great guitar player. The legendary B.B. King, probably the best blues guitarist of all time. Ralph Towner and Kevin Eubanks, two very different guitar players, but both outstanding. Legendary Jim Hall, some serious guitar star power here. Look at these legends here. Look at that. You've got Paul Schaefer, Bob Berg, Gary Burton, Steve Swallow, Will Lee, Miguel Miller, Pat Metheny, and Jack DeJohnette. Some serious jazz music royalty there, in my opinion. Kurt Rosenwinkel, who's gone on to become a huge guitar star in recent years. Brilliant player he is. So I would say the standout tracks to me are Anthem, which has got a great Kurt Rosenwinkel, Pat Metheny-esque sort of guitar solo. Six Pack's good, another favourite track of mine. Jack's Theme, and Ashpodo, and 2 duo tracks with Gary Burton and Ralph Towner. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So there you have it. There's the tracks of who plays on what, and some credits, special thanks. So there you have it. 6-pack. Brilliant showcase of some of the best guitar players in the world. Brilliant album, and I love the album cover. Well, it's not a hard one, but I know which one is the best album of Gary Burton's GRP catalogue. It's a no-brainer. Reunion. Love it. Brilliant. And, you know, this is one I go back to a lot, and we were just listening to this the other day. Fantastic album, some of Pat Metheny's best guitar playing. And one thing I like about Pat Metheny and Gary Burton, they always bring out the best in each other, and they sound great together. And, you know, Pat Metheny becomes a different beast when he plays with Gary Burton, and vice versa. They just sound fantastic together. And the band of Mitchell Foreman, Will Lee, and Peter Erskine, they sound outstanding as well. So there you have it. As my favourites of the GRP catalogue of Gary Burton, Reunion. So that's it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite album of Gary Burton's GRP catalogue? Is it Times Like These, Reunion, Cool Nights, or 6-pack? There's no right or wrong answer. You know what to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will be back next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again, thanks for listening.